Hey everyone, and welcome to Life Unpotted. This is Daisy, and thanks for being here today. This is a day where we are doing back to back episodes because we're traveling, so we're just getting ahead of things. And we just had the most effortless conversation of all time. And it had me reflecting a lot because this journey of podcasting has been a convoluted one with a lot of emotion because the expectation we put on ourselves, the expectations we've put on each other, the expectations we've put on what it is that we're creating. And this podcast really started as a tool for us to explore ourselves, to understand ourselves. And somewhere along the lines, it became defined as we know something and we need to teach something. Or at least maybe I put the expectation of like I was an expert with also carrying the anxiety that like I wasn't an expert. So I was just reflecting on that as we had this past conversation where Sophie just brought a problem that she was reflecting on and we just talked through it and it was a very helpful episode. And I think when you're creating something for yourself and somewhere along the lines you think that you're creating for someone else, things get really confusing because you put a pressure on yourself, you put an expectation on yourself, and there's no way that you can possibly meet that expectation because it's not actually real, it's self-created. And I'm just reflecting on that of thinking that, oh, I need to have something novel to say in this podcast. I need to have something that is just the perfect planned out product. Like I'm thinking of different podcasts that I've listened to that are shows and that there's a million different people researching for the topics and they're creating a structured show and they know where it's going to go. And I think there's a beauty to that. I think that is something that's great. I love those kinds of shows. I think I like the art that goes into it. And I think I've had that expectation for this show, but I think the uniqueness of this show is the fact that we don't know where it's going to go. And I think that's what makes it good. I think that's what makes it helpful to me. That's what I think makes it most insightful to me. And I guess when you're creating something, it's really ultimately you that is the test audience because if it feels good to you, that means that you're going to want to keep doing it. And ultimately, you're going to reach people at some point who appreciate that. So I'm saying all of this because I'm realizing that this podcast is truly expression, right? Like we might have novel ideas on occasion that are really insightful and that are really special and artistic and very well said. But that can't be the expectation. That is something that just happens by the nature of letting go. Because I observed as we were talking about the topic of the last conversation, I was like, I don't even know what I'm saying. I don't feel connected to what I'm saying. But really, sometimes that's the process of getting connected to ourselves is by not being connected to what we're saying, but just having a safe space to be able to talk through something and not meaning that that has to mean something about you. So I think it's been a very difficult journey for me personally of not knowing where this is going to go, not knowing that I'm going to have like an equation that's going to get me a certain number. It's been really uncomfortable. And I also think that holding on to that is what has definitely held me back from just having a freaking conversation because that's what we're doing here. That's what a podcast is. It doesn't have to be this spectacular, amazing thing. And like, no one said it had to be but myself. So that's where all this judgment comes up and gets in the way when it's like, well, if you're not having fun with it, if you're not enjoying it, what's the point of doing it? Like you're a prisoner to it. So I think I'm seeing the benefit really here of just because you're observing something, just because I'm observing, like, oh, like what you're saying, like, what are you saying? Why are you saying that? You don't have to give it any weight. Because when we were recording the last episode, I was noticing that hardcore, but I didn't give it any weight and it didn't impact me at all. I was like, this is something I should think about maybe a little bit differently. I could think about this for the long term. It doesn't have to impact this show that we're doing in this exact moment. So I think being able to learn about why you put pressure on yourself is really helpful for unstacking the Legos that you have put on the pressure of yourself. Like this has been a journey. We've been exploring pressure. We've been exploring these kinds of feelings that we put on ourselves for any sort of expectation of needing to have something be perfect. But I'm seeing now as I continue to explore this component of pressure, you don't just say, I'm going to explore this and it's gone. It's like, okay, I have this huge tower of Legos that are putting all of this pressure on myself. Like it's a tower of pressure. And it's like we have to take off one Lego at a time. It's like recognizing what is this pressure and what are the little pieces of why we are having all of this pressure on yourselves. And I think that is a natural progression of figuring something out. It's going into these little nooks and crannies and debunking them and setting yourself free. Because that's ultimately what it's about. It's setting yourself free. So we all want to be free, don't we? So it's really examining those things that don't allow ourselves to be free. That is what sets us free. And that's where I feel like I'm at now. That's just like what I've been practicing in my life is figuring out what are these things that hold me back? Because it's a blanket statement. Don't put pressure on yourself. Well, that word pressure is made up of thousands of different blocks and Legos. So it's learning to deconstruct each one at a time and having fun with it, understanding that this is what life is about. It's unpacking these conditionings that we put on ourselves. And it's something that it can be an enjoyable experience to unpack it because it allows you to be free.
I'm always curious when one of us talks for like 6 minutes in the introduction, if the listeners like are engaged throughout the whole all of it, or if they notice it, because ultimately it shouldn't matter. Like it's still that one person who's saying you're still getting content out that's just as meaningful and impactful. So it's interesting how that would even be a consideration. And it's like, that's exactly it. Like, how many of these mental considerations are you going to give weight to instead of remembering that the point of this, the point of life, the point of expression, the point of creativity is to do just that: express, create, be yourself. Say the things that you thought you never could say. And reflecting on what you were saying, Daisy, was making me think a lot about how there's so many versions of me who never would have thought I could have a podcast. There's so many versions of me who never thought I had anything valuable to say, or that I used to just get so insecure all the time of what do I say? I'm holding the mic. How am I going to express myself? We almost forget that there is this unlimited pool of intelligence that's constantly existing at all times. It's the intelligence of the trees, of the birds, of my heart, of your eyes, of this microphone, of technology, of the food we eat, of our body digesting, the stars, the seasons, all the different ecosystems that exist in this planet. It's never ending. It's everywhere. It's the fact that we're here. It's the fact that I can even have this conversation. And when we get so caught up in this illusion that we've created of right and wrong, and I'm going to hold back my whole life from ever sharing that because I'm so scared, the disproportionate fear that keeps you and only you back, because it's your life and everyone else's will go. Everyone else's life will continue to move on. Life won't wait for you. Life isn't going to wait for you. Quite frankly, life decides when you're born and it decides when you leave. It's not really up to us. But what is up to us is the choices that we make to let go, and the choices that we make to say what we want to say and express what we want to express, despite what the fears say. Because it's just like you could miss out on so many opportunities, so many specifically creative opportunities, careers, connections with other people, having fun in reality, having fun with this intelligence, being intelligence, like being this existence. If you're so caught up in this idea of yourself and worrying what people are going to think about you, and thinking that the weight that you give to your image, the weight that you give to this idea of you only exists in your mind. It does not exist in anyone else's mind. To everybody else, maybe they have a few thoughts about you. The way that how much time you spend thinking about you and how much time I spend thinking about me, oof, what a waste of time. What a waste of existence when I could be getting out there and sharing and connecting.
Yeah, I said oof because that is oof. To think that we are limiting ourselves because we are so fixated on we aren't saying it right, or I should be doing this, or I should be doing that, that we actually miss out on the opportunity to simply express ourselves. And like that is a need that we have to express ourselves as an individual. And something we were reflecting on that clearly has impacted the way that I've showed up to even today's podcast of like, we've been doing this podcast for 2 years now, and we started it at a very chaotic time in our lives where it just became an outlet for us both to learn something. And we have both learned and changed in so many ways. And it's almost like we've came to a common voice. We've really worked together so much on this podcast to build something that it's inherent to want to be able to have our own voices, to be able to have our own pure expression where no one else is inhibiting that. And kind of what I'm I'm realizing is, like, you can have so many takeaways on what the output of that will look like when you make that decision. But what I'm seeing here is that maybe the pressure and the expectation that I've put on myself and you've put on yourself has stopped us from having pure and true expression within these podcasts. And these are just fleeting thoughts as I've reflected so much as we've just podcasted that it can be a very difficult thing to express, or it can be a very difficult thing to measure of, am I expressing myself truly? Is there someone else getting in the way of me expressing myself truly? Am I projecting my inability to express myself truly because of all the pressure I put on myself? Am I projecting that onto someone else? And I definitely see that because a big part of why podcasting was something that was important to me, a driving factor, was because I've always wanted to express myself and, like, not be silenced and know what I'm saying. So inherently that can get confusing when you're doing it with someone else, but it can also be a triggering thing that's difficult to navigate when you're working with someone else so closely to create something that takes the two of you. And I'm seeing how for me, like, I've gotten in the way of my own self, and it's so easy to project that onto my podcast host, Sophie. It's so easy to project that onto the pressure I put onto myself that, why am I not doing this properly? Well, there's the problem right there, is because you're thinking you're not doing it properly. It's like we create the heaviness, we create the weight of the problems we face. And this can be just something that we're learning from and experiencing. It doesn't have to be the end all, we're going to the grave and this is going to be all we have to show for it. It's like, that's the pressure that I find myself putting on myself with this. But I see how when I'm able to let go of that concern, like, we can just show up here and, like, have a conversation where we're expressing ourselves separately and we're both showing up and doing that, and that can be what the podcast is. It doesn't have to be this thing we're both trying to be. And we have different experiences. Maybe it's me who feels like I've been trying to be something that I'm not. And ultimately, it's like we just want to be who we are, but it's like, oh, we can't do that because who we are isn't enough. We need to change ourselves to be here for this.
That's it. It's like this idea of who we are isn't enough, and what we're going to say isn't enough. It's not going to make sense. Why would I talk? Because I have nothing valuable to say. And I think so many of us share this sentiment. I've heard this from so many people of, how would I ever do that? How would I ever express myself? How would I ever get on a stage and talk to all these people? And it's just like, when you start to see yourself in everybody, you start to realize everybody is just you and that there really is no separation and all of these weird things you think or all these insecurities. Like, we all have an overlap. Everybody experiences anxiety, everybody experiences fear. These are byproducts of the human condition. And what's been extra scary is having a podcast where we're not trying to hold back and we're talking about really deep experiences of life. And there's been so many times where I've judged myself for, why are you talking about existence? That's weird. Oh, right. The thing that is providing us to be alive is weird to talk about. And it just shows how, like, spending so much time in other conversations where there's so many roles and everybody's in a role and everyone's trying to prove something and everyone's trying to get their value from where they fit in the group, and there's just a lot more pressure to say something to make yourself look a certain way. And there's so much freedom that comes when when you're talking from the heart, and to be able to get to the place where you can talk from the heart, you have to realize that there's a heart to get to. There's a part of you that is able to talk about anything. It goes back to the whole thing of personalities, debunking what a personality is. How so much of our personalities or our perceived personalities are, oh, I'm an introvert and I'm an extrovert and I'm this way and I'm that way. It's just like, yeah, but have you ever asked yourself how many stories that are built on top of those beliefs that you have about yourself, of who you think you are and what you can't do and that you're not capable? Have you ever thought of, oh, wait, maybe that was a story I just told myself? Maybe that's not reality or what really is true? And holy shit, it's just like how many doors and opportunities open up when we free ourselves from our own mind and our own limitations. And the place to start is through expression. That's the place to start, at least in my opinion, by trying to do what you think you can't do.
Well, it's like again, if we're doing a podcast and I'm judging the idea of a podcast of people who just get on there and they just start talking and start expressing themselves, like, there's not enough meaning there. There's not enough value there. Like, that is lazy. That's just unplanned. Like, that you're not working hard enough for that. And it's really interesting to examine that I have been afraid to just show up here as myself because I judge that because, oh, you're not working hard enough if you're just getting on and expressing yourself and talking about things. And I see how that level of pressure, it just shuts me down. It stops me from even having a conversation. And you know what? It's like, what is this judgment of judging a podcast where people get on and they express themselves and they talk about things? We're all humans. We all want connection. Sometimes we're in places of our life where we get that connection from online. We get that from podcasts. We get that from shows. We get that from other places. And like, there's literally nothing wrong with that. So I definitely see this judgment I have of it because it means that, oh, you don't deserve to have a career from that. You don't deserve that because you believe in yourself to do that. That's embarrassing because why would you believe in yourself? Like, that's the internal dialogue. And I'm starting to see how absurd that is because that's called not believing in yourself and that's called working against yourself. Like, we live in a time where so many things are possible because of the internet. And I clearly have a ton of judgments of it because I won't let myself just be me here on this podcast and think that I have to like show up in some meaningful way. And sometimes that's what happens. Sometimes like that's the beauty of it. But like we're not going to get there if we're not just expressing ourselves. Like, think about all the people in our lives who can't express themselves. Think about all the people we know who struggle to express themselves. I think about how I've spent my whole life struggling to express myself. So it's really freeing to have this conversation and to say, fuck it. Like, why don't you believe in yourself? Truly, like this is the layers of learning to truly believe in yourself and to be confident in saying what you're doing and to not need others' validation to say, this is what I'm doing and to go all in on it. And I guess that always comes back to like the conversation before we had on this of like, we have to take accountability for ourselves. And that can mean so many different things. Like, I have to believe in myself no matter what. And I have to be able to stand behind myself in whatever I'm doing that I trust that it's valuable because I'm putting energy and effort into it. Again, this is just these are the puzzle pieces of unpacking the pressure that I've put on myself because it's a big fat one, the pressure, the intensity. Like there's so much to it. Yeah, there's a lot to it. And it's just freeing to let go of that because it's so easy to have all of these judgments of the type of person who would judge me for doing this, type of person who'd be judging me for doing that. When at the end of the day, it's really hard to accept that it's just you who are making those judgments. And it's just you who's stopping you from being free. Like, you don't have to make your life more difficult than it is. I tend to make my life more difficult than it has to be when I listen to the stories and I don't confront and face them and I avoid them. That's what happens when we don't confront and face things that control us, is that they control us. So,
Yeah, it's like we're thinking like the having a podcast is a perfect example because there's been so many times where I've been insecure about having a podcast because again, the internalized beliefs that oh, I heard one thing at one point and I formed an opinion and maybe when I was a lawyer, maybe I was insecure of, oh, people who are creative aren't good enough, or people who are creative or in the arts are not as prestige as me in the corporate law. Like, it's like you're just so insecure that you have to put other people down. And how funny it is, it reminds me of people who are like, the creator economy is so corrupt, or look at those lazy pieces of shit. Like, they're creators. And it's just like, yeah, and they're making like $1 million a year, or they're having real impact on society, or they're building community. Like beliefs, a lot of beliefs, if not all beliefs, are empty. They are ideas that we've internalized throughout our life, and we can choose how much weight we want to give to them. And a lot of the times, it's the classic example of we believe something because we believe that everyone else around us thinks that. But if we find out that, oh, everyone is wants to do that, or no, people actually don't feel that way. Notice how when you find that out, all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm a little more confident in this now that I got that person's approval, or I'm a little more confident in it that I saw these kind of people do it like this. And now I feel like it's something I can do. When we always wait to get permission from other people to debunk our own internalized beliefs, we're going to never be the ones to debunk them for ourselves because we will always be looking to other people. But there are no other people. There's just your mind. And there's just the stories that you have within your own mind. So you decide of, am I going to continue to listen to all this bullshit that I've created? And I will say, I will have compassion towards myself of, okay, of course, societal's beliefs can be really influential in the way we think. It's what we're raised with. There's so many different factors. But really, it's questioning my own insecurity I've had about having a podcast to the point where it's made me miss out on, it's not about having a podcast. It's about expression and deep conversations that are extremely impactful and extremely meaningful and impact people's lives and creating a space where that can be experienced. So yeah, I am holding a Shure mic just like everybody else is on Instagram, but I can let go of that insecurity of knowing that what I'm creating has meaning and knowing that what I'm creating comes from my heart. And that's a lot more valuable to me than just staying in a career field out of the insecurity of other people judging me for making the switch. When in reality, I'm more fulfilled and content than I've ever been. So you could spend your whole life, whole life, whole life. I'm going to stay in that career. I'm going to do that thing just because I'm so scared. I have so many judgments towards myself that I can't even fathom what that would mean about me if I made the switch.
Well, it's pretty profound how insecurity can drive us like that. It can drive us so much that we don't do something that we want to do, that we stop believing in ourselves for something that we want to do. And we actually are the ones, when people ask us, what do? We convince them that what we do is shit because we're too insecure to put it out there. When no one actually thinks that, most people don't think that. No one has directly said that to me. No one has directly said that to you. It's like it's just fascinating how insecurity can drive our entire life. And I'm really seeing that in it. I'm seeing how much being free from all of this shit matters to me, but I see how even throughout doing all this podcast, I have been so hard on myself. I've been so freaking hard on myself that I have chained myself up into like the deep space of a prison that no one could access because I was so ashamed. And it's really fascinating to look at shame and insecurity and all of these things. And we were doing an episode the other day where we were talking about the medical system. And I was like, I got really insecure because I was like, who am I to talk about this when there's so much noise out there? There's so much judgment of other people out there that it's so easy to internalize that about yourself, to monitor yourself and to not let yourself be free. Because a lot of the times the masses don't like when there is someone who is just freely expressing themselves. They say that's dangerous or how dare you do that. But look at us as humans, like our minds are what control us. And it's so easy to literally internalize these experiences that you've witnessed into contain yourself within a very small fragment of life that you allow yourself to live because you're afraid of upsetting others. When in reality, you just use that as an excuse to free yourself from yourself. Like it's just your mind. And that's the craziest thing that I'm trying to get my head around is that it's just my mind that is controlling me. No one's told me anything explicitly. It's the internal battle with ourselves of thinking, oh, this isn't good enough. You didn't plan this well enough. You're not saying something more clearly. You could be saying it more clearly. And it's like there comes a point where we just have to drop it. And I don't know if it was just me, but I think generally our culture is obsessed with who's the best, who's good. But all of that is relative. All of it is relative. There's always going to be people who find what you make as desirable and helpful. Like we are not meant to please the masses by any mean. We'll drive ourselves crazy. And if you don't let go of that expectation that you need to be amazing, well, you're not going to get there because you're not going to allow yourself to make mistakes because you're not allowing yourself to be you. And I see how I've been afraid to be me on this podcast. I've been afraid to be free because I'm judging that it's not been good enough when in reality, like that is literally all relative in your own mind. It's like you have to believe in what you're creating or else no one else is going to believe in it either. And I do believe in this, but I see all the constraints I put on myself. And I will say, I heard this quote recently that I'd like to share with you. It takes wisdom to make good decisions, and it takes failing to become wise. So basically saying like we can't gain wisdom unless we're able to make bad mistakes. So if we are too afraid to ever make mistakes, like how are we actually going to learn?
We get to choose how much we believe something, and I think we forget that. When we have so many internalized beliefs and so many belief systems that are generationally rooted and come from so many different angles. Sometimes it's easy to feel like I wish I could just start again. I wish I didn't have the mind I have. And here's a really exciting thing about the neuroplasticity of our brain and our mind is that we can. We can begin again. We can face all of our insecurities and all of our fears so we can find out they were never true. Because that's exactly it. Like, when I think of myself, second year of being a lawyer, so anxious, so scared, I couldn't even think about any other career. What I see now was me just being scared to face my fears. When we let our fears control us and we let these beliefs control us, we never give ourselves a chance to find out what's on the other side. And what's on the other side is it is so entirely expansive. It's world changing. It's world shattering at the same time. It's letting go of everything we ever thought that was true, only to realize that it's not. Only to zoom out in reality and go from a broader sense of, oh, can I imagine Earth from space and look down on all this? Can I have greater awareness and greater perspective to understand that, to understand the miracle of existence, the miracle of life, and how every human life is so capable beyond to be whoever they want to be.
Well, it's that, right? It's like there's so many different chains that we can pick from. We can pick from like the rainbow of chains or every other color we could want. And it's like, which chain do you want? Because we all chain ourselves, but we all chain ourselves differently. And the path of letting go of that is a path of constantly doing the work to recognize that you don't have to be what your thoughts are telling you. And this podcast has been such an exercise in that. It's been an exercise in learning to believe in myself, like with conviction, with authenticity, with realness, by not being like, here's my title, I'm going to leave. You can judge me based off my title because I'm not confident enough in myself for you to judge me based off who I am. When judgment is all relative anyway. But I think when we die, we want to be able to say like we lived life truly. And I think again, as words develop and change as we grow, I think this is one of those words of what living truly means. And that word is changing for me like as we do this podcast because I've hid my entire life and I see how I've even hid behind this podcast at times or behind my relationship at times. And ultimately, like when we die, we want to realize like we never fucking hid. We were not hiding. We were living fully for ourselves and we weren't ashamed of anything that we did or said when we were being true to ourselves. I think the people that we meet in our lives that leave an impact on us are the ones that are fully confident in themselves. And what that is a result of is healing because we're always dealt cards of why we shouldn't love ourselves because we're humans and that's how we internalize things as we grow up. And it takes work to unlearn those things. But it's a beautiful gift to be able to share with anyone that you meet of when you believe in yourself and when you love yourself and you aren't afraid to share any part of yourself. That's what inspires others to do the same thing. And if you zoom out and look at us as human beings, our life is maybe 100 years if we're lucky. Every life is meaningful, every experience is meaningful. And it's like believing that with conviction is profound and can move mountains and make so much change because we all want to feel love and we all want to experience what's actually happening in this reality versus the virtual reality of our mind. And that is a never ending process till the day we die. And it's an exciting process that we get better at and we become more and more and more free. And there's no right way to be. It's always just with yourself. It's always where am I at? Where did I start? What have I learned? And how am I showing up compared to how I've showed up in the past?
I think I also want to say that when we're unlearning certain thought patterns and getting to a point where we no longer believe all the things that we once did, we don't do that by forming another belief that we place on top of that belief to feel better about ourselves. For example, sometimes in my life when I've had an insecurity, I haven't I've tried so hard to get rid of it that I've created stories about other people to make myself feel better. Of, oh, that person isn't doing something or they're doing that and I'm going to judge them or something to deal with the fact that I'm so insecure about myself or I'm insecure about my experience. And what it comes back to is, yeah, like thinking, oh, that podcast isn't as good or judging other people. And you realize that, like, the journey of unlearning a belief and the journey of being confident in yourself is a natural experience that you don't try to have. It just happens. Just like all of these states of being we're trying to reach. It's not one we do. We don't become happy. We don't become content. We don't become confident. We let go of what is getting in the way of relaxing. Because ultimately, it just comes down to relaxing into the process and doing it when you're scared, not waiting for a point when you're not scared and continuing to find out over and over again until your brain starts to form this belief and does its own investigation. And it's like, wait a minute, why would I ever think that about myself? When you face yourself, when you face who you are, yesterday I looked at myself in the mirror for like 5 minutes and I just stared at my eyes and I was like, who are you? And it's terrifying. But guess what? I'm still here. I did it. Like, we'll always come out on the other side of it. And this genuine experience of I believe in myself, it it has potential to become and feel very genuine. But I think along the journey, sometimes getting there requires figuring it out of trying to feel confident, trying to feel a certain way. But when we try to feel a certain way, we recognize that the belief that we had in the first place isn't one we have to go leaps and bounds to disprove because it was just never true to begin with. And I think that's where clarity comes from when we realize nothing is inherently true. Everything is a story. And that's where we are able to free ourselves to form this deeper inner knowing of, oh, you know you're whole, but it's not a mental thought. It's a feeling. It's a feeling state. I think truth and wholeness is it's an embodiment. It's something we experience as we embody it. It's not something that we intellectualize.
Well, it's like for us, at the end of the day, it's like, did we create mud so we could drag ourselves through it? Or did we walk above the mud on a bridge because we decided to take that route? It's all up to us, like how we want to experience life. But it's so easy to want to work against ourselves. Like, I'm just thinking about the different reasons why I've been so terrified of this podcast. But it's like, I've been so terrified to just like be free on it. And there's so many different stories and reasons we can believe it. Like you said, like they're not necessarily even real. They're just like, this is where like the mind gets out of hand. And this is where the extreme exposure to social media. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone has thoughts. Everyone is mad at someone. Everyone hates someone. Everyone wants to cancel someone, which I hate cancel culture because like that is the antithesis of life. It's to grow and redeem and learn and go on. But when we have this exposure to people being like, fuck this person, go unfollow them because they're the worst. And like a bunch of people on social media will do that because someone did something. It's like that is exhausting. And it's like that is social media. Like that's kind of the downside of social media is that people can gang up on people and destroy them. And we just have so much exposure to all of this information. And when you look at our brains that love stories, it's so easy to take all of this information and input it into the stories of our brain. This is where it's things like TikTok, where they know your algorithm, like they know you so well that If it's dark out and it's raining, they're gonna send you a scary TikTok about someone who died in the rain from a storm, and, like, that for the brain is lethal because our brain loves stories like that because it starts making it our reality, our virtual reality that we live in, and that's why I'm just reflecting on this. I'm like, God, we should really minimize the stuff we put into our brain because ultimately, all of the stuff we put into our brain has the potentiality to be put into a story that directly impacts the reality we live within. There's only so many things our brain can catch. And that's where I see input is such a threat to us if we aren't careful of what we put into our minds. If we watch a marathon of horror movies, like the stories you're going to be fighting, the stories you're going to be witnessing within your brain are going to be ones that are terrifying because that's how the brain works. You put something in and it spits something out, and that becomes your reality. So, just reflecting on that of just the usage of social media and seeing everyone's opinions of everyone and how that can just be so destructive because of course everyone has feelings, but that does not mean that it's to be taken as a fact of how you should live your life. Like it's a very dangerous place to live your life based off what someone else behind another screen says to you. But that goes with the input of the stories we create about ourselves that restrict ourselves. And it's just an endless mirage of stories. And we gotta pull the plug. We gotta stop the stories. But it's a process. And that's why this podcast has been so great because it's made me work through so many stories. And I think I'm getting to a point where I'm letting go even more of not caring at all. And that's a good thing, in my opinion, because if you don't care at all, you're allowed to show up as yourself fully and you're a full human being. So there's something that's bound to happen there that's interesting and great because you're powerful as a human. And when you allow yourself to be you, that's also really powerful. So that's how I'm seeing this podcast right now. So it's been a good combo.
Another convo flowing along. I think a takeaway for me on this is we always make the choice of how many considerations we bring with us, how much weight we carry, how many stories we choose to believe, and giving yourself compassion with it's not always your it's not always up to you of what input comes your way, but we do have the ability and the capacity to take the time to take accountability and check in with ourselves and saying, "Hey, how am I letting the fear of what I think other people think or the fear of being perceived in a certain way? How am I viewing life in a very narrow-minded, limited perspective, or am I viewing it in a expansive, abundant perspective of we are all connected to we are this intelligence existing on this earth and watch your life change as you allow yourself to tap into that. But in order to do that, you have to get comfortable with not being comfortable and you have to get comfortable with facing your fears over and over and over again, only to find out that fear is never truth. None of it was ever truth. So thank you for listening. This was fun. I'm having a lot of reflections also on the podcast. So that's an exciting place to be to have clarity on it, space to understand it, and just makes it more exciting for moving forward. So thanks, Daisy, for joining me on this episode. And thank you to the listener for being here as well.
Thanks for being here. And if you are here and you do like this, go to our Spotify right now. Give us a 5-star rating. We're at 85. We're hoping to get to 100. So appreciate your effort in doing that. And we'll see you next time.